Hello, this is Ross Bliley from the podcast Pigskin Tales. This podcast is sponsored by Sterling Soap Company. With products sold throughout 41 locations around the globe, Sterling Soap Company has a unique assortment of products to choose from for your loved one for the holidays. Handmade artisan soaps created by Roderick and Amanda Lovin since 2012, these products are affordable and provide great value. Act now and save on your shipping costs. If you purchase $75 or more, your shipping cost is free in the United States. Shop now online at sterlingsoap.com. Face off with Firefly Publishing for another drop into the fascinating world of pro hockey history with Hockey Hall of Fame True Stories 2. Following his bestseller, hockey historian and writer Eric Zwig opens the doors to the Pro Hockey Hall of Fame, revealing a treasure of untold tales, bizarre incidents, and captivating trivia that will leave the most devoted puckhead astounded. Just to name drop a few of the players he's included in this book are Wayne Gretzky, Jaromir Jagr, and Bobby Hull. Hockey Hall of Fame True Stories 2 is a must-read for pro hockey fans who crave more than just scores and statistics. Mr. Zwig invites you to uncover the true stories that have shaped the sport, ensuring that you will never look at the game of hockey the same way again. So skate on over to Amazon.com, Target, and Walmart to get your copy now.
Another episode of the official PFRA podcast here on the Sports History Network. John Bozeka, George Bozeka along with you. We always try to talk to different individuals that had an effect on the game of football, whether it be through what they did on the field, off the field, whatever it may be. We try to find the stories that also maybe you haven't heard. And today is another case of one of those. We chat with a former Cleveland Brown, actually, who had a short stint in the NFL, but it was part of his life, and football has played a key factor in his life, and that's Joe Righetti, who played for the Cleveland Browns in the late 60s and in 1970, and he also just recently authored a book, 14 Mile Orange, that we will talk to him about today. Joe, thanks for joining the pod today.
Thank you for having me.
Joe, let's start in a place that I always like to start with former football players, and that's asking about your life in football. Where did that begin, and when did your love of the game become abundantly clear, and when did you realize that, this was the thing that you were going to do at least semi-professionally for some point in your life?
Well, I grew up in southwestern Pennsylvania, a small little coal mining town, and we didn't have any kind of organized football at all. We had baseball, which was, Little League and Pony League, that type of thing. But we did have junior high football. 7th, 8th, 9th was the junior high team, and then 10, 11, 12 was the high school team. And to be very honest with you, my brother was a much better football player than I was. And I just kind of did it because he did. And I can't say I really enjoyed it that much. In junior high, it was fun. It was supposed to be fun. It was fun. You learned a lot. In high school was a lot of work. And I wasn't real sure that I'd want to go to college. I did have some opportunities because I was a bigger person that some colleges looked at me. And West Virginia was a place I wanted to go. And I went down there, and I was only 17 when I graduated high school, and they wanted me to go to a junior college for 2 years and then on to Morgantown. And my father was not keen on that idea. He thought I was going to be going to college longer. And so he said no. So eventually my mother basically made the decision for me that I was going to go to college. And Waynesburg College was about 25 miles from our home. And they had a pretty good reputation as a quality football team. I didn't know a whole lot about them, to be honest with you. I met with their assistant coach And I just enrolled there. And when I did, that was probably the best decision we ever made, my mom and I ever made, simply because I met a guy named Mo Scary. And I don't know how much you guys know about Mo Scary, but he was probably, aside from my father and grandfather, the greatest man in my life as far as football goes. He was a former Cleveland Brown, which I did not know at the time. He was the last surviving member of the original Cleveland Browns. He passed away about 10 years ago or so. And he was just a guy who, for whatever reason, and I've talked to him and I've talked to his sons, and he took a special interest in me and just worked me pretty hard and made me a much, much better player than I ever imagined. And then in my end of my freshman year, he left. He went to Otto Graham, who he played with at Cleveland, offered him a job with the Washington Redskins, and he took it. And we were all very disappointed because we had lost 2 games that year, but we had a real good team. And he says a chance of a lifetime, I have to take it, and he did. And even though we were disappointed, we were still very happy for him because it gave him an opportunity. And Mo went on to eventually coach with Miami Dolphins for 15 years with Don Shula, part of the 72 team. And, he had a great, great NFL career coaching-wise. I think 16, 17, maybe 19 years of NFL coaching. So he really was the guy who made me believe that I could possibly play at a little bit higher level.
What was it about Mo that gave you that belief? What did he instill in you? Because even though you knew him and he had a profound effect on you, it wasn't a long effect. What about him, or it wasn't a long time that he worked with you guys? What was it about him, Joe, that made you gravitate towards him and realize that he was the right person for you, that could kind of get a little bit more out of a young Joe Righetti?
Well, he was tough. I mean, he pushed you, but he knew when to stop. There's a story in the book, which is a pretty interesting story, I think. But I was, I'm 17 years old. I'm playing football with guys who are 21, 22 years old, and I'm getting my butt kicked pretty much every day in practice. But I can't say I was really putting out 100% either. I was just kind of surviving, getting through the summer training camp. And I was laying on the floor of the locker room trying to get as cool as I possibly could from the cold concrete. And there was a sign up on the wall. They had all these cliches all around the locker room, and one of them just caught my eye, and it said, "Enthusiasm knows no bounds." And I just laid there and I thought about, have I really been enthusiastic about playing football? And I was pretty honest with myself, I think, in my abilities. And I would say I was a mediocre football player at that point. And I said, you know what, I'm going to try my best. I'm going to give it 100% and see what happens. And so I went to practice that day, and I probably worked harder that day than I ever did any day in my life. And it was a hot August day in southwestern PA. You guys probably have days like that in Ohio too. It's just muggy and no air moving. And there was a stream we had to cross to go back to the locker room. I just laid down in the stream. I was spent. And my team members just sort of walked by me, and Mo was the last one to come by. And I thought, oh boy, I'm going to get it now. He's going to scream at me. And he kind of reached down and grabbed my hand and pulled me up, and he grabbed me by the arm, and we ran up the hill. There was a hill we had to go up. Ran up the hill to the locker room, and he said, "You okay?" I go, "Yeah." And he continued on. I slowly walked back to the locker room, and he could have, belittled me, or he could have made fun of me or whatever, but he didn't, and he helped me. And then later on in training camp, I had developed these big blisters on my heels, and the shoes we had in those days were, I call them Herman Munster boots. They were these big, high-top leather things that must have weighed 2 pounds each. And he sent an assistant coach over to a nearby town, sporting goods store, and bought me low-cut shoes. And I was the only lineman on the team with low-cut shoes. Mm-hmm. I was like the envy of the whole team, and it helped me with my blisters. And he would do things like that I didn't see him do for anybody else. I don't know exactly why he did them, he doesn't know why he made a project out of me, as his son told me, and it turned out pretty well for me.
Joe, in your book, I was really struck by the first statement that you made in the book was something that your father told you. It said, "Don't give yourself a
Right.
sore shoulder patting yourself on the back. If you do something
Right.
well, people will tell you." And you go on to say, talk about the relationship that you have with your father and your grandfather. Can you elaborate on that and what those relationships meant to you?
Yeah, my my dad was a coal miner. My grandfather's a coal miner. All my 4 other uncles were coal miners. It was kind of like the town literally revolved around the coal mine, and they were all really, really hardworking people. And my grandfather immigrated from Italy to Kentucky, then eventually to southwestern Pennsylvania, and got some farmland. And he had 10 kids, and there's 12 mouths to feed. And they had to really, really work hard and pull hard together. And it's hard to explain. They owned a hillside. I don't know how else to explain it. About 25 acres on a hillside. And as each son got married or daughter got married, my grandfather gave him 5 acres of land to farm. And it kind of like was a satellite where they were all around him. And they would help him. He would help them. We basically had to help each other. And that was the thing, that nobody was more important than anybody else, and everybody had to work hard to survive. And during the Great Depression, my dad told me, if you could make a quarter a week or something like that as a kid, every Friday they would come home, and every cent of money they made, they put on the kitchen table. They never kept a penny for themselves. And I just said, that's pretty, selfless to do that. Not to, you worked and did all the labor and you got nothing to show for it. Because that's what you needed to survive. And that kind of stuck with me, that, the family comes first, and you have to, make opportunities for other members of the family to be successful if you possibly can. And they did that for me. My grandfather did it just through hard work and, telling me stories growing up and hanging out with him. I spent a lot of time with him on the farm, and, we had a lot of fun together with that. And my dad, it was a lot of work. It was labor, physical labor, as far as cutting grass, and everything was on a hillside in Pennsylvania, so there was nothing flat. So it was a lot of hard work, and but we all did it together. That was the thing. Nobody would sit around the house doing nothing while someone else was outside doing some hard work, and that's the thing that came through with me. And my dad was an outstanding baseball player. He played during World War II. When the war was over and he was in Europe, they asked him if he wanted to come home or if he wanted to stay in Europe and play baseball. And he goes, "Well, I don't plan on coming back here, so I'm going to play some baseball." So he toured Europe with a lot of other major league players, and then came back to the United States, I think about 4 or 5 months when the end of the summer, like in November, December. And just got married and started his family, and didn't want to go in the coal mine again, but he did, because that was the only real job opportunity I guess they had to make any kind of money. But it was he was always a very humble man, and he was always someone who taught me through example. He was a great role model, because I don't care how tired he was or how dirty he was. If I asked him after dinner, "Can you want to throw the ball around?" He goes, "Sure." We went out and we threw the ball around, or he kicked the football to me, or whatever it was. He would never say no to me to spend some time together. And it wasn't always great quality time, but it was, it was time we spent together, and it was time he could, tell me stories and tell me things about his life growing up, because I was always curious about that. So I kind of think that's the best way I could describe the relationship we had. And my grandfather, I would see him almost every day after school, except when I got to high school, of course. But they had no telephone. They didn't want a telephone, and so we were the closest house to him. He was about 125 yards away, and I'd walk up there, and we'd sit down and have some cheese and some salami and some wine. And I don't care how old I was, I always came home with a little bit of red around my lips from having a little bit of wine. So it didn't really make any difference.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot like my childhood. My grandparents and my dads were Greek immigrants, and real similar. They were all factory workers. They always wanted something better for me and better for my kids, and
Right.
they were hardworking. And yeah, when I hear you say those things, it reminds me a lot of my experience and sort of that. They were a different breed, as
Yes.
they were hardworking people, and they had that work ethic and love for their family and all of that. What's the significance of the title of the book, 14 Mile Orange?
When I was I'm 7 or 8 years old, I was all. This tells you how selfish a child I was. I was always very disappointed at Christmas time. My father was one of these guys who was a saver. He was always prepared for the worst. Coal miners were always on strike. They were somebody, for some reason, they'd call out a strike, and we might have to go 4, 5, 6 months without having any income. So he was always concerned about having money and having, we always had this huge garden in the summertime that we'd have food. And one year at Christmas, I was disappointed. I'll put it that way. And I said something really, really stupid to her. I said, "You don't love me." And he looked at me, and I could tell I really hurt his feelings. And I was kind of wanted to take it back, but it was too late. And he says, "I want you to sit down and I want you to listen to this story." He says, "You know what the greatest gift I ever got for Christmas?" And I said, "No." I was kind of probably sarcastic. I go, "No, what?" He goes, "I got an orange." And I said, "Nobody gets an orange just for Christmas." And he goes, it was hard for me to understand at that time, of course. He goes, "You know why it was the greatest gift?" And I said, "No, why?" He says, "Because my dad walked 7 miles to the nearest town that sold oranges." This is like Christmas Eve, I guess it was. And, cold Pennsylvania winters and snow and who knows what the conditions were. He bought a dozen oranges, one for each child, and him and my grandmother. And he came back and gave it to us, and it wasn't the fact that it was an orange. It was the fact of what he went through to get it for us. And would you walk 14 miles for an orange for me? I said, probably not. I was, really I don't know, thinking to myself, nothing else. And that's the impetus for the title. And just to show, what would you do for somebody else? How far would you go? And what kind of hardship would you endure for your loved ones? And that's where the title comes from.
Joe Righetti is our guest on the official PFRA podcast as former Cleveland Brown and author of the book 14 Mile Orange, which details stories from his life and his life in football as a whole. Joe, you touched on it earlier. Michael Moscari was your head coach, your first couple years. Then you guys win a national title.
Right.
Carl DePasqua, your next coach, was
right.
I always find this interesting. Was that team that won the title, was that Mo's team or was it Carl's team?
I'd have to say it was 75% Mo's and 25% Carl's. I don't want to take anything away from Carl because he was our head coach. Mo laid the foundation, I guess. The players that were there when I got there were outstanding players. But we lost our quarterback, a guy named Harry Theophilides, who went on to go to the Redskins with Mo as a quarterback and later played for the Jets. But Harry was the best player we had, and he was an All-American, and he graduated. So Carl was the assistant coach at Pitt, and he comes down, and he has to recruit quarterbacks, and he recruits, I think we had 5 or 6 quarterbacks going into that season. And none of us knew anything about Carl. There was no internet in those days. You couldn't do any research, and all you knew was what you were told. But he was a different kind of guy than Mo. He wasn't a screamer. He was a little quieter. He was calmer in many ways, but he worked you hard, and he knew what he wanted to accomplish, and he knew how to really push you to excel. And we just started that season thinking we'd have a decent season. And if my memory correct, I don't know how many games we won by 1 point. or like 6-0 or 7-6 or 14-13 or whatever they were. It was a lot of close games. And as the season went on, we never thought of an undefeated season. That never really came into our minds probably to the last game. But Carl was an outstanding coach. I want to make that very clear. His family was a great family, and he was the major reason we won the championship that year is because of the way he handled the team and the way he handled us. And when the season was over, we were undefeated, and then we had a meeting, and he said that they had two possibilities. One was a Tangerine Bowl, and the other was this national tournament, and you could win a national championship. And he said, "I'll leave it up to you guys." Well, a lot of guys said, "Well, gee, the Tangerine Bowls, that sounds like it's a warm place, so maybe we might want to go to," I think it was in Florida. And the other guy said, "No, let's go for a national championship." But it meant playing 2 games rather than just 1 game. So we decided that, and Carl was happy. We decided that, and then we were going to play New Mexico Highlands was our first game, and so I think it was in early December, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe late November. We got on an airplane to Pittsburgh Airport. The first time, I would say 95% of the guys had ever flown on a 4-engine propeller plane, and flew to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and played that game. And that was by far the most exciting football game I've ever played in my life.
It's interesting. I'm looking, and I do want to jog your memory a bit here. I'm gonna run through the season for you because I found it because that's what we do here. But you guys play Slippery Rock and you win by 31. You guys go to Susquehanna and you win 6-0. You play at Ohio Northern in Lima at the time and win 30-7. You play California, PA, and win 20-7. You then play Frostburg State. You dominate them 58-0.
Yeah.
You dominate Geneva 54-7. You get by your 3 next games. You guys get by 13-7 over West Virginia Wesleyan, 7-6 over Findlay, and then 14-13 over Westminster from PA. And then eventually it all culminates in Whitewater State in the national championship game. Right. You guys win 42-21, and I want to get the name right. Your running back, Rich Dehar, I think was his name.
That's correct. Yeah.
I mean, this guy had a career day, didn't he?
Absolutely. Can I go back to the other game first, just because there's some interesting points in this? The first game.
Yeah, go ahead.
The New Mexico Highlands game had a running back named Carl Garrett, and Carl Garrett was the AFL Rookie of the Year the same year O.J. Simpson came in, and Carl was an outstanding running back, and their team, I think we were down 21-6 at halftime. We were losing the game badly, and we were getting beat up on the line. And I don't remember what Carl said to us. I was something probably along the lines like, "You guys can do it." He was very always encouraging us. And we go out, and in the second half, we take the lead. And then with like a minute and a half left, I think they take the lead. And then we're down on their maybe 10-yard line or so, and Rich Dehar, our running back, who had a great day, the final game, ends up taking a halfback option and throws the ball into the end zone, and our tight end Bob Miltenberger catches it, and we win the game. But it was just, we were all spent and exhausted after that game, and it was such a win, and we enjoyed it so much. So we go back to Pennsylvania, and then we have to play Whitewater, as you mentioned, and there's we go. This is in when we play Tulsa, Oklahoma. So we fly to Tulsa, and we play Whitewater, and we beat them pretty easily. I won't say easily. We beat them pretty handily, and we were all kind of in shock because the previous game was a tough game, and the championship game wasn't nearly as tough on us. But the team was ecstatic, and we were just so happy for Carl and for all of ourselves, of course, and our families, because our families were big supporters. But virtually nobody went to either of the games because they were so far away. And, this was not during the summer when a lot of them had time off or anything like that. So I think we had about 20 people at the New Mexico Highlands game. Maybe there were 200 at the Whitewater game, but it just worked out really well. And when you win a national championship, you get attention. And I think that's what happened to me and my teammates, because there were 3 of us on that team that ended up getting drafted by the professionals. Myself, Don Herman got drafted by the Giants and played for them and also for the Saints. And another defensive back we had, Dave Smith, transferred to Indiana, PA, and later on was drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers. So it was amazing that a team that small and that would be able to put 3 guys in the NFL from it.
Well, and not just that, but also the idea that, you guys also had such a dominant defense. That's what stands out. And when, you read articles, and again, I'm going a lot by the Waynesburg, football site now, and took me to Wikipedia for some of this, but says you guys were averaging just 149 yards of total defense and just 40.2 in the rushing defense, which for back then, I mean, teams that ran in the shotgun back then were few and far between. So stopping the run was paramount. But tell me about that defense that you guys had.
Well, we had some really, really good players, and we all, with a couple exceptions, we played since we were freshmen and sophomores together. So there was a lot of unity. But Carl was instrumental. We didn't score a lot of points that championship year. So Carl, next year, all we did was practice offense every day in the summer. And the guys on defense were getting more and more angry because we did not spend any time. Excuse me 1 second. We did not spend any time with the defense. So there was one of our linebackers, Marty Runyon, who was an outstanding player. Marty's really furious, and he wants to go see Carl and tell him, look, we got to practice some defense. So we got one defensive practice in before our first game, and I think we were all like a bunch of crazy animals that wanted to play and show him what we could do with practice or with no practice. And but I think Carl knew we were a pretty solid group, and we could handle it. And Mo Scarry, going back to Mo in my book, I talk about Mo taught me how to play the piano. That's what he called it. I'm going to teach you how to play the piano. And that meant to hit the guy in front of you and move left and right like a piano player would go left and right to make plays. And you're right, there was no shotgun offense in those days, so it was always the center, 2 guards, and the quarterback right in front of me. I was a nose tackle. And so every play started out pretty much the same. And we played a 5-2 defense, or 5-4 defense, however you want to call it. And so I had 2 big defensive ends and 2 defensive tackles who were all excellent ball players, and we just worked together and encouraged one another. And the linebackers were great, hard hitters, and we were all kids from basically about 100 miles away, 150. I think the furthest kid was 150 miles away. I take that back. Dave Smith was from New York City. How he found us, I have no idea. But they were all local people, sons of steel workers, coal miners, farmers, and they were used to hard work. And we put our time in, and we got the reward for it.
Yeah, I mean, 2 shutouts to start the season were a pretty nice statement towards your head coach, George. I think you had a question.
Yeah, you in the book you mentioned too a number of times, and he seemed like he was there with you when you were looking at the Browns after you'd been drafted. Doc Lewis.
Darryl Lewis was my coach my senior year because Carl DePasqua left at the end of our junior year, and Carl went to the Steelers. And he coached with the Steelers, and then maybe a year or so later, he became the head coach at Pitt. And so Carl, I had 3 coaches in 4 years. and each one was different. Dr. Lewis was a dentist, and he had he was an assistant at Pitt. He played at Pitt, and his style was different than the other two guys. So we were kind of on a roller coaster. Didn't know what to expect from the head coach, and we kind of the freshman class dealt with all three of them. The other guys only had to deal with two, but the guys who were older than us. But it was kind of unusual. And Dr. Lewis, he said to me when I got drafted, he goes, "Would you like me to go and negotiate with you?" I said, "Sure." I don't have the slightest idea what I'm doing. I only knew of one guy, and if you do some research, Joe Marconi was from the same hometown as me. He was much older. He was the number one draft choice of L.A. Rams back in, I think, 56 or 55 or somewhere around there. And I had met Joe, but he was like a legend, but he was much, much older than me. So I never really got a chance to see him. But he had a long career. I think he ended up playing from, 55 to maybe 67 or so, something like that. And he ended up playing with Ditka and up in the Bears with those guys and had some good seasons. But no, so Dr. Lewis and I just fly out to take the shuttle plane out to Cleveland and negotiate with Mr. Modell and got him Howard Sauerbrei, who was the general manager at the time. And it was, you feel like I have no bargaining power. I'm from a small, tiny college, and I'm going to ask for something, and they're going to offer me something, and then we'll figure out what's going on. So that's kind of what we did. But Darrell Lewis, he helped me a lot as far as doing the negotiations, and whatever was going to happen, I guess. And I was going to probably take whatever they offered me, quite frankly, because I didn't have a whole lot of choice.
Tell me about you get to the NFL now, and you're obviously a Cleveland Brown, and obviously that holds such intrinsic value for my father and I, because we've been Browns fans our whole lives, and unfortunately for my lifetime, at least since the late 90s. But when it comes to the Browns, Blanton Collier is your head coach, and I've heard tons of stories about Blanton. My wife's family is from Hiram, so her grandfather would say that he'd go to the supermarket on a Friday night, and there was Blanton, just standing at the supermarket, and he was soft spoken. He wore glasses, kind of to himself. He wasn't what you'd think of when you look for an NFL coach. What do you remember from Coach Collier?
Very, very calm presence. He looked more like a college professor, like you say, wear the glasses. I remember the first meet. I met him when I went to negotiate. He introduced himself, and we had a short little interaction that day. And then when we went to the mini camp, I guess they called it for rookies, they gave you like IQ tests and things like that. And he talked to us, each individual guy and stuff. But he would say to us, "I'll never criticize you in the newspapers." I remember that. "I'll only criticize you to your face." And he was true to that. He never really criticized anybody in the papers. He would say, "Don't call me Coach, call me Blanton or call me George," which was very unusual. And but you could walk up there and say, "Blanton, can I do this? Can I do that?" And he'd say, "Yeah, no, whatever." He was a real people person. My second year I played there, my roommate in college was getting married. And this would never probably happen today. But anyway, I was best man at his wedding, and I asked Blanton, I said, "Blanton, can I go to his wedding? I'd have to miss Saturday morning practice." And he goes, "As long as you're back at the hotel in time, go ahead." So I told Dick Modzelewski, who was my position coach. So I went to our Friday practice. I got on a plane, flew to Baltimore, went to the rehearsal, went to the wedding the next day, and jumped on the plane, flew back, and was in the hotel. Did everything. Everything worked out, thank goodness. And he was just a real human being. He didn't really act, like a head. He acted like a head coach, of course, but he wasn't more than he should have been. He was a real approachable. You could talk to him about pretty much anything. If something was bothering you or something wasn't going well and you wanted to try to change something, he'd be willing to listen to you. He wasn't like my way or the highway type of a coach. And I always appreciated that about it. And most of the other guys did too.
I know you mentioned in the book that one of the offensive linemen who obviously has ended up being a Hall of Famer that you went up against in practice was Gene Hickerson. Can you tell something about your run-ins with Gene Hickerson?
Well, rookies reported a week early, and so I'm out at Hiram College, and I think there's probably about 8 of us on the defensive line who are rookies, and so we would go to practice, and we worked on this head slap. It's illegal today, but in those days it was a legal move. We weren't allowed to use it in college, so basically it had to be a learned skill. So we would practice on each other every day. Every day we would do this. So the end of that week, the veterans show up, and there was no shorts and T-shirts type thing. The first day you went out, you put pads on and you hit. And so I don't know, maybe the second day, and everybody's got a helmet on. There's no names on anybody. You don't know who they are. I didn't know anybody who they were. And so Mo Gillespie says, work on your technique. So I gave Gene a head slap. It was one of my better shots, I must say. And I got around him, and they were happy I made the play or whatever. And he kind of quietly walked up to me, and he goes, "If you ever do that again, I'll break your leg." And Marvin Upshaw, who was defensive end, was standing next to me. I could hear Marvin laughing, and he turned to me and goes, "He'll do it too." And I never did it again. And we kind of became friends, but I'm always a little leery about what he would do to me if I ever did that again. But as you said, Gene's a Hall of Famer, and he was an outstanding player for a long, long time. But you didn't mess with Gene. When he told you something, he was pretty true to his word. But I never forgot that encounter.
You played with 3 Hall of Famers, and there's another guy you played with that I want to get your opinion on, because I think he's a Hall of Famer too. Actually, 2 other guys that you played with, but you played with Hickerson, you played with Paul Warfield, and you played with Leroy Kelly. I've asked so many guys. We had on a gentleman who played for the Bengals back in the early 80s, whose name is escaping me, and he played also with the Packers, and he played with James Lofton for a short period of time. And I always ask this: what made Kelly, Warfield, and Hickerson Hall of Famers to you? Like, what was it about them in practice, them in the locker room? What made them stand out, Joe?
Well, Gene was unusual. I'll put it that way. If you ever went to a Browns game and watched the warm-up, everybody was warming up except Gene. Gene would lean against the goalpost with his legs crossed. And I would say to the other guy, what's he doing? That's how he warms up. And then whenever they would get together in groups, he would run through the plays and things like that. But Gene's idea of warming up was leaning against the goalpost with his feet crossed, kind of with his arms crossed too, if I remember correctly. Leroy was quiet, but a hard worker. I think Jim Brown probably kind of being in his shadow a little bit made him want to work harder. He was a friendly guy. He was a nice guy. You would never know he was the best running back or one of the best running backs in the league. He was not, pompous or had a big ego or anything like that. He was a very, very down-to-earth kind of guy. And Paul Warfield, I remember watching him a lot in practice, at the end of practice especially. And I'd be down in the end zone doing something with the lineman, and I'd see him running patterns. And when he'd run a pattern, he would grunt. I never forgot this. He would make a cut and he would grunt like it was painful almost, but his patterns were so precise. And then when he went to the Dolphins, I remember watching a TV show, said he only had like 18 catches for the whole season, but 17 of them were touchdowns, or some statistic like that, which kind of made sense. But he was a real quality receiver, of course, and everybody was shocked. I had broken my hand in the last game against Minnesota, and I was in Cleveland getting my cast off during this, maybe it was January, I guess. And February, and they announced that he had been traded to Miami for Mike Phipps, and we were all just in shock. We couldn't believe that they were going to trade probably the best player on the team, or certainly one of the best players on the team, for an unknown quarterback. But Bill Nelson had some issues physically with his knees, and Jerry Rome was the backup quarterback at that time, and I guess they wanted to find someone who was going to be there for a few years, but those guys were great examples of hard work. They rarely ever made a mistake. If you made mental mistakes, you weren't around for very long. The physical mistake they would tolerate, but not the mental mistake, and they never made mental mistakes.
Yeah, the last question I had about teammates of yours, and then I know George has some other questions, but I've always felt that Gary Collins and Dick Shafrath deserve places in Canton. I don't think I'm alone in those feelings, and I guess I'd like to hear if you were going to make a case for those two guys. I think Gary Collins, one of the most underrated split ends of all time, and I think Shafrath was as good as they came at left tackle. So tell me about those two and why you think they deserve gold jackets all these years later, Joe.
Gary Collins and I were really good friends, and I don't know why these guys became my friends. I mean, I was just a nobody from nowhere, and they accepted me, and they took me out with them, and we had a good time together. And I remember sitting with Gary Collins at a table and him giving me advice, and he was a really good friend. He was a hard worker. He would catch the ball over the middle, where most guys were a little shy because in those days they could really wrap you pretty good, the defensive backs. But he was a man of courage. He would speak his mind when he had to. But I totally agree with both of those guys being in the Hall of Fame, because they were just quality ball players, quality individuals. Gary was big. He's probably one of the biggest receivers I'd ever seen for that position anyway. Most of them were 190 pounds, 180. I think Gary was probably 210, maybe 220. I'm not sure exactly how big he was, but he was a big, tall, tough receiver, really, really tough receiver. And Shaft was undersized. He told me stories about whenever, I guess, Paul Brown was the coach, he was light. So he would tape 2 5-pound weights to his waist under his T-shirt, because every Friday we had to get weighed in, and he was always light, and they wanted him to weigh, I don't know, 245, and he probably weighed 235. But Shaft was maneuverable. He could pull. He could protect the quarterback. He worked really hard at it, and but he was undersized compared to certainly by today's standards. He was undersized, but there was a lot of fight in him, and he worked hard, and he was just a great example of what to do correctly, and another humble guy. There was nobody who was sort of a big mouth or a braggart or anything like that. They were all good teammates, and that was the one thing that really I was rather surprised at, because everybody made different money, and some guys made a lot more than others, but there was none of this sense I'm more important to the team than you are. Everybody was important, no matter if you were on special teams or you were the star running back. Everybody had a role to play, and they really stressed that teamwork. Especially that year we had a good season, and we went to the NFL championship, and we fell short, but it was a good season for us.
You mentioned Shafrath. A couple of years, we have a PFRA convention in different NFL cities every other year, and we were in Cleveland a number of years ago, and Dick Shafrath and Jim Houston were our speakers, and I got to say, that was the immediate reaction I had when I met Dick Shafrath and he came in, because he was just, to me, small to think that he was an offensive lineman. And I thought to myself, because Jim Houston was a pretty good sized guy, I could see that.
He was.
I could see that. But when I saw Dick Shafrath, I said, my gosh, this guy played offensive lineman in the NFL. It was. You mentioned that you guys played in the last NFL championship game before the merger. You unfortunately wasn't a good situation. The Vikings just seemed to have the Browns' number that year. But then you also played in a really key game or participated in a key game the next year, the first Monday night game against the Jets.
Yeah, that was. We went on strike that summer, and so we're going on strike was like going to practice. Bill Nelson would call practice at some, I forget where we were, John Carroll or someplace like that. And we go practice for like an hour, then we go play golf. So it wasn't really like a strike that you would think of, people on a picket line or anything like that. But I think only it lasted maybe a week. But we go into practice and we're going through we had 6 preseason games in those days, and the Browns were unusual because we would travel in the preseason and not come back. We would go like to maybe go to LA and then fly to Tampa for the next game, and then stay in Tampa for a little bit and fly. We flew to Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and we spent a week there. I think Art Modell owned the amusement park there, I think. So we stayed there, and then we played the Kansas City, who had just won the Super Bowl the year before, in the preseason game. Then we came back to Cleveland and finished up the preseason. But they said, okay, we're playing this Monday night game, which was unusual because we're always used to playing Sundays, of course, or possibly we played Pittsburgh occasionally on Saturday. But I remember vividly being in the locker room and getting ready to go out for the game, and Bland saying to us, okay, you guys, you're the only game on TV today in the whole country. Don't embarrass yourselves, which I thought was rather unique, comment. And we went out, and the first half I thought we handled ourselves pretty well, and then the second half Homer Jones runs the kickoff back, but Namath started to bring him back, and then Billy Andrews intercepts a pass and runs it back for a touchdown to kind of seal the win. But it was exciting. I mean, it was a night game. We didn't play a whole lot of night games. And I remember coming out of the dugout, and there was Howard Cosell interviewing somebody. And, it was the first time I ever saw him. But it was a big crowd. It was at night. It was a national audience. And, it was a lot of exposure for us. The only bad part was we didn't get any day off that week. It was because Monday was our day off, so we just went back the next day at Tuesday, watched the films, and just went back to our normal routine. And the guys were all kind of upset because we had gone straight from the preseason, and we didn't get many days off during that time, and everybody was kind of worn out. But it was exciting.
I have one final question for you, Joe, and then I don't know if John has an additional one as we're starting to wrap this up. Art Modell, as you know, I'm sure, has been sort of demonized in the Cleveland area because of the move to Baltimore and everything. What, just from your perspective, playing when you did, what were your impressions of Art Modell?
Well, I'm gonna give you my personal opinion because of how he dealt with me. And I thank him. I mean, I thought he was a great guy to me. I had 3 pretty good preseason games in a row, and each time when I played the game, he came and sought me out and told me that he thought I played well, and he congratulated me. And here's the president of this, the owner of this club. He didn't have to look for me at all. And I remember the last exhibition game my rookie year, I started the game, and it was I believe it was against Minnesota, and I had a pretty good game, and I thought I think I made the team. I played well. I had a sack, I had a fumble recovery, I probably had 5 or 6 tackles. I thought I played pretty well, and he came to me in the locker room and said, "You really proved yourself." And I have to look at it only from a personal perspective. I know he's been demonized in town because of the way in which the team left. But as far as he and I thought he was a stand-up guy for me, and a lot of other guys maybe not so much. I don't know. I only can go by what my personal interaction with the man was.
Yeah, that's really interesting because as George was saying, around here. He is completely demonized by a lot of people. And I think those that were around the organization until what happened would probably say that he was a stand-up guy that that always did right by them. And I think that's unfortunate because I think, and I guess this is another kind of question here, maybe to end things before we talk about one more thing, but he probably deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, doesn't he, Joe? I mean, for what he did for like TV deals and what he did for ownership and what he did for the Browns for so many years, he probably deserves a spot in Canton, right?
I would have to agree with you. I think that he was, I guess, in marketing in New York City or something when he came there, and he was a young man. That was one of the things that really surprised me, that he was probably in his 40s, I'm guessing. And, he and Lamar Hunt, I think, helped make that merger work. And they, look what it's exploded into today. I mean, had they not merged, who knows what the leagues would have been, and all these other leagues they have going on now in the off seasons and things like that. I think it's all going back to those lucrative TV deals and other ways of making money and merchandise and all that kind of stuff that probably people never thought about. And I think he was ahead of the times in a way, because I think he saw through that, probably because of his background in marketing and advertising rather. But I think he was someone who should be in the Hall of Fame. I think he deserves it.
Joe Righetti, former Cleveland Brown, former Waynesburg Yellow Jacket, and author of the book 14 Mile Orange, our guest here on the podcast, on the official PFRA podcast. Joe, I have one more question for you. I have never asked a player from your era of the NFL this, but what are your thoughts on the modern day NFL? What do you think of what it's become versus what it was when you were a player in 69 and 70?
I don't like it. I don't like the rules. As a defensive player, I think they should get 10% more in their contracts, because they're apt to be penalized and fined for, you make a good hit, you get penalized. Oh, you're hitting too hard. You breathe on the quarterback, roughing the passer. I have more respect now for the guys who played back in my day, especially the quarterbacks, than I probably did at the time, simply because there were some exciting parts of the game. The kickoff was always exciting. You stood up and the fans cheered and you watched the kickoff. Now it's like, I better go to the bathroom during the kickoff because nothing's going to happen, and it rarely does. And onside kick, I remember, you're down by 2 points, you get the onside kick, maybe you kick a field goal and win the game. But now it's not competitive that way. And I really wish they had left the rules alone. I understand the safety aspect of it, but don't change the game. You're not going to be able to ever make it injury proof. It's unfortunate, but that's just the nature of the game. If you don't want to get hurt, then don't play the game. I mean, that's just something you have to accept, the fact that it might happen if you're going to play a contact sport. I mean, nobody wants it to happen, but it just does happen. But I wish they had not changed the rules, and I wish they had left them alone. And the players certainly are excellent players today. They're bigger, faster, stronger than we ever certainly were. I don't know if this is probably going to be a little controversial. I don't know if they understand the game as well as we did. We had 3 defensive coaches. Now I look on some of these teams, there's 12 coaches on defense, and I don't know how much thinking the players do and how much the coaches tell them what to do. And I often see things, time management and things like that, which don't make any sense to me, or the ball, they should stay in bounds, they run out of bounds, or, that type of thing. But I wish they left the rules alone.
Joe Righetti, our guest. Joe, we appreciate the time. If people would like to purchase the book 14 Mile Orange, which I hope the picture on the front is maybe you with an orange in your hand as a child. I don't know if it is.
No, I wish it was. I've had a lot of people ask me that, but no, it's just they asked me what I wanted on the cover, and I said I wanted a kid holding out an orange. And they sent me that picture.
Where can people? He looks like a little Italian boy that was wandering the streets of Brooklyn back in the day.
Yeah, Probably, yeah.
Where?
It's on Amazon.
Okay.
Amazon's the easiest way to get it.
Okay, outstanding. It's a great read, and we appreciate Joe being on the podcast today. And Joe, you're welcome back anytime. Great stories, and thanks for stopping by and making the time for us.
John, George, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate you having me on, and my best to everyone.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.